There was a region in the ancient world that drew attention for its beauty and fertility. Stretching across the Jordan Valley, that land was watered by abundant rivers and surrounded by fields that flourished with ease. There, cities emerged that seemed promising, especially two that stood out, Sodom and Gomorrah. They were vibrant urban centers with intense trade, well-built houses, and a life that to human eyes seemed comfortable and enviable. Whoever passed through those cities saw progress. They saw luxury. They saw opportunity. The markets were always full, the palaces gleamed under the sun, and the parties stretched deep into the night. Many dreamed of living there amidst the apparent wealth and the frantic rhythm of a society that prided itself on its own independence. The surrounding lands also contributed to the region's fame. The fertile fields seemed to require no effort. There was pasture for the flocks, fruit in abundance, and a climate that favored the harvests. It was no wonder that when Lot had the opportunity to choose where to live, his eyes immediately turned to that valley. It was as if the land exhaled promises. It looked like the Garden of Eden, a visible blessing within reach. However, behind the beauty, there were shadows. What seemed prosperous hid deep moral cracks. Prosperity, without the fear of God, served as a stage for arrogance. Abundance without compassion generated indifference, and freedom without limits transformed into a doorway to decadence. But those looking from the outside did not see this. Appearances shone bright. The busy streets, the imposing buildings, the luxurious garments, and the banquets seemed to witness only success. Few could discern that that land, so fertile in riches, was already beginning to dry up in values. The atmosphere was one of celebration, but judgment was silently approaching. In the midst of all this, Lot established himself, and without knowing it, he had planted roots in dangerous soil, not for lack of beauty, but for an excess of vanity. What would come next would show that not everything that glitters is a blessing, and that decisions made by appearance can have eternal consequences. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and comment which city or country you are watching from. It is always wonderful to know how far our stories are reaching. Lot was a man accustomed to living with Abraham, his uncle, a faithful servant of God. For a long time he had walked beside him, learning to trust in divine promises and to obey the call of the Most High, even without knowing for certain the final destination. Life alongside Abraham was marked by tents, pilgrimages, and constant dependence on God. It was a simple life, but full of purpose. With the passing of years, the flocks of both grew. Lot's shepherds and Abraham's began to quarrel, for the land could no longer support so many animals together. It was then that Abraham, with wisdom and humility, suggested a friendly separation. He gave Lot the right to choose first, and in that moment, facing a crucial decision, Lot looked toward the Jordan Valley. His eyes were enchanted by what he saw. Green fields, rivers meandering through the landscape, cities pulsing with life and trade. Everything indicated ease, rapid growth, material stability. It was, to human eyes, the perfect choice. Without hesitating, Lot opted for what was most promising from an economic and visual point of view. He chose Sodom, but in that choice, something was lost. Lot did not consult God. He did not ponder the spiritual risks. He did not reflect on the moral environment of the city. He chose with the eyes of the flesh, not with the eyes of the heart. He preferred comfort to commitment, apparent security to divine direction, and so he began to drift away not only from Abraham, but also from the altar, that place of meeting with God that he had witnessed so many times alongside his uncle. Upon moving near Sodom, Lot began a journey that seemed peaceful, but would lead him to unthinkable situations. The soil was fertile, yes, but the environment was hostile to faith. And little by little, without realizing it, Lot was being absorbed by a culture that despised what was holy. His tent moved closer to the walls. Then he came to dwell inside the city. Upon establishing himself in Sodom, Lot soon realized that the atmosphere of the city was different. Everything there seemed to function around pleasure, appearance, and the pursuit of self. There was wealth in abundance, yes, but reverence was missing. The streets were busy, the parties frequent, and business prospered. But the altars were empty. Sodom was marked by a culture of excess. The abundance of bread was notable. The markets overflowed with food, and the population lived surrounded by luxury and comfort. But this prosperity had generated a type of silent pride, a collective feeling of self-sufficiency. The inhabitants felt no need for God, nor saw any reason to account to him. There was also a growing insensitivity toward others. The needy were ignored, foreigners despised. The city revolved around its own navel, and empathy was rare. To live well, for the Sodomites, meant to consume, satisfy desires, and keep up appearances. The soul, however, was emptying out. What would once be a cause for shame was now celebrated. Behaviors that wounded human dignity were treated as freedom. Evil gained space, first in whispers, then in open conversations, and finally in public practices. The city no longer distinguished right from wrong. What mattered was immediate pleasure and social acceptance. And amidst all this, Lot tried to maintain his faith. He knew something was wrong. His soul was vexed, seeing so much injustice and perversity. But he was surrounded. The city's culture not only pressured, but influenced. And even without surrendering to local customs, Lot saw his family being molded by that environment. His daughters grew up there. The values of the city began to enter through the windows of his house. The corruption of Sodom was not just external. It was a slow and silent corrosion that affected the interior. And the longer one lived there, the harder it was to perceive how far one had drifted from the fear of the Lord. The shine of Sodom blinded the spiritual reality, and few could see that. Behind the splendor there were deep cracks. Judgment would not come by chance. It was being provoked daily, in every choice, in every attitude, in every laugh that mocked holiness. With time, the wickedness in Sodom ceased to cause astonishment. What might have shocked before came to be viewed with naturalness. The city had crossed a dangerous line. Sin was no longer the exception, it was the habit. And when error becomes routine, the heart becomes insensitive. Life there followed its course. There were parties, celebrations, and business. But behind all this movement, there was a growing resistance to correction. No one wanted to be confronted. Advice was rejected. Warnings were a cause for laughter. The people no longer cared for the truth, and if anyone dared to point out the right path, they were considered an enemy. Lot, living there, knew this hardening up close. He tried as best he could to preserve his integrity, but it was like walking against the current. He saw the city plunge deeper and deeper into perverse practices, while his voice echoed weakly in the midst of the crowd. It was hard to stand firm when everything around pressured him to yield. The problem of Sodom was not just the presence of sin, but the celebration of it. The people not only practiced injustice, but took pride in it. Disrespect for boundaries, contempt for the life of others, open immorality. Everything was seen as a sign of freedom, when in truth it was slavery. There was no longer fear. The name of God, if mentioned, was a cause for mockery. And the spiritual environment of the city was like dry ground, where the seed of truth no longer germinated. Hearts were hard, very hard. There was no longer room for repentance, nor interest in change. As the people surrendered to their desires, they also drifted from the divine purpose, and every act of injustice accumulated before heaven like a growing weight. The time of God's patience still held out. But the clamor of wickedness rose day after day. The city was heading unknowingly toward a destiny that was being sealed by its own refusal to listen. Sodom had grown accustomed to error, and when error becomes habit, judgment ceases to be just a possibility. It becomes a matter of time. While Sodom followed its routine of excesses and perversities, something invisible to human eyes was happening in the heavens. A clamor generated by constant injustice and oppression began to intensify before God. What men ignored, heaven heard. What the city treated with contempt, the Lord observed with attention. God's silence was not forgetfulness, but patience. For a long time, he had endured the ways of that people, waiting for repentance, waiting for change. But now, the measure of iniquity was almost full. The clamor could no longer be ignored. Justice needed to rise. God then communicated to Abraham that judgment was about to be executed. In a moment of intimacy and reverence, the Lord revealed to the patriarch that he would go down to see up close if the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah was truly as grave as was said. It was human language to express something deep. God's justice is precise, never hasty. He knows everything, but acts with equity, based on truth. Abraham, upon hearing about the imminent destruction, felt the weight of that news. He knew Lot was there, and with a heart full of compassion, he began to intercede. He did not bargain for righteous cities, but for the righteous lives within them. His cry was a reflection of the heart of someone who understood both the holiness and the mercy of God. The conversation between God and Abraham revealed something even deeper. Divine judgment never arrives without first being preceded by opportunities for mercy. Even in the face of such corruption, God would consider sparing the city for the sake of a few righteous ones. His justice always walks hand in hand with grace. Meanwhile, in Sodom, everything went on as usual. No one imagined that the hours were being counted. The streets were full, the houses lit, and plans for the next day being made with the confidence of those who think tomorrow is guaranteed. But there was a spiritual clock marking the time. Heaven was already moving. The footsteps of the angels already echoed in the direction of the city, and in that moment, a final gesture of mercy would be revealed, before justice finally descended. At dusk, 2 angels arrived in Sodom. They had the appearance of ordinary men, but carried a celestial mission. Lot was at the city gate when he saw them, and sensing something special about them, insisted they stay at his house. Perhaps deep down, he knew that visit was not common. There was urgency in his attitude, an unusual zeal, as if he wanted to protect them from what the city could do. The angels accepted. They entered his house, and Lot prepared a simple banquet for them. But the night, which could have been quiet, soon turned into a terrifying scene. Men from all parts of the city, from the youngest to the oldest, surrounded the house and demanded that Lot hand over the visitors. They wanted to violate them. They wanted to publicly expose their wickedness without any shame. Lot tried to argue, to protect the guests, but his voice was drowned out by the cruel desire of that crowd. They even threatened him, as if he were the enemy for opposing what they considered normal. It was then that the angels intervened. They pulled Lot back inside and struck the aggressors with blindness. Even so, the men continued groping, trying to find the door. That night revealed with clarity the spiritual state of the city. There were no more limits, there was no more fear, and in the face of that extreme demonstration of perversity, the angels declared the judgment. Destruction was certain. God's patience had ended, but there was still mercy for Lot and his family. The angels, with firmness, instructed Lot to gather all his own, sons-in-law, daughters, wife, and prepare them to leave. Haste was necessary. The city was condemned, but salvation was within reach of whoever listened and obeyed. That visit, even amidst the violence, was an act of love, a final invitation, a final warning before the end. With the house still silent after the night's turmoil, the angels spoke firmly to Lot. Time had run out. There was no more intercession, no more waiting, no more appeals. God's judgment was decided. Destruction would fall upon Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, it was time to flee. They gave clear instructions. Lot was to gather all his own and leave immediately. It was not permitted to look back. They could not stop anywhere in the plain. They needed to run to the mountains, far from the reach of the punishment that would come. It was a direct order, a thin line between life and death. Lot went out looking for his sons-in-law pledged to his daughters. He tried to warn them. He spoke of the urgency. He implored them to leave with him, but he was mocked. They thought he was exaggerating, perhaps even disturbed. Destruction seemed unlikely to those who had grown accustomed to sin. And there, among his own family members, Lot began to feel the weight of the unbelief the city had sown. At dawn, still reluctant, the angels practically dragged Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters out of the city. It was hard to leave. It was hard to leave behind a built life, possessions, memories, everything that seemed so solid. But there was no more time. The sky was about to open, not with a rain of blessings, but with fire and sulfur. God's patience is long but not infinite. He had given time, given signs, given chances. But now the measure was complete. Justice needed to act. The punishment would not come by impulse, but by necessity. It was the divine response to a people who had rejected all opportunities for repentance. As the sun rose on the horizon, Lot and his family were led out of the reach of judgment. It was the beginning of a new stage, marked by loss, yes, but also by deliverance. With racing hearts and hurried feet, Lot fled with his wife and daughters toward the mountains. Behind them, the city that once symbolized stability and promise now carried the sentence of heaven. Every step was a mixture of relief and pain. Relief for escaping with life, pain for everything being left behind. The silence between them was dense. The haste imposed by the angels prevented any goodbye. Houses, belongings, friends, memories, everything had stayed. Lot did not look back. He kept his eyes ahead, conscious that obedience was the only safety in that moment. But not everyone could detach their heart from the past. Lot's wife, consumed by attachment to what she had lost, disobeyed the divine order. In an instant that changed everything, she looked back. It was not just a look of curiosity. It was a gesture of longing, of resistance, of connection with a life she did not want to abandon. And there, in that gesture, she was lost. She was transformed into a pillar of salt. Her body became a landmark, but her gaze was fixed on what God had already condemned. That woman, who was walking toward salvation, was swallowed by the choice not to let go. The escape, which was already difficult, now became even more painful. Lot and his daughters moved on. There was no time for lamenting. Destruction was about to fall, and the only option was to obey. What remained behind, people, possessions, and even family ties, could no longer be recovered. The path was narrow, the road was steep, but life depended on that total surrender. The flight from Sodom revealed more than divine justice. It also revealed the weights of the human heart, the silent attachments that prevent complete freedom. And it showed that often, true deliverance requires not only leaving a place, but allowing that place to also leave from inside us. Upon reaching a safe distance, Lot and his daughters stopped for an instant. The sky, previously clear and golden with the first rays of morning, began to darken. A heavy silence took over the valley, as if creation, for a brief moment, held its breath. Then it happened. Fire and sulfur descended from the sky with violence. The flames did not come from torches or human wars, but from the very wrath of God. It was the judgment that had been postponed for so long, now poured out without restraint. The earth shook. The cities that once gleamed with wealth and pride now became dust and ashes before the Creator's eyes. The fire did not choose houses or streets. Everything was consumed, the palaces and the shacks, the gardens and the squares, the full markets and the wide avenues. Men, women, young people, children, all were struck. No wall was high enough, no door was strong enough, no wealth was useful on that day. Justice reached every corner, every voice that had mocked, every hand that had practiced evil. Lot and his daughters watched from afar. There was pain, there was astonishment, but there was also the certainty that God is just. There was no exaggeration in his sentence. What seemed severe was, in truth, a response to years of contempt, of arrogance, of celebrated sin. The plain that had once been compared to the Garden of Eden was now a smoking field, barren and silent. No song, no laughter, no sound of feasting, only ashes and memories. Sodom and Gomorrah ceased to exist. The valley of abundance transformed into an eternal symbol of judgment. The destruction was irreversible. There would be no reconstruction. There would be no restored memory. The history of these cities became a warning for future generations, not only about the end that comes, but about the process that provokes it. Lot survived, but he would never be the same again. And as the smoke rose to the sky, marking the closing of a cycle, the soul of the one who escaped now needed to find direction in a world completely different from the one he had left behind. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is not just a memory of destruction, but a mirror that reflects the human condition before time, grace, and the justice of God. More than the end of two cities, it speaks to us about choices, about resistance to repentance, and about the danger of normalizing sin until it becomes irreversible. Sodom was beautiful to human eyes, but spiritually devastated. Its appearance hid a decay that grew day after day. God did not destroy it for a single error, but for an accumulation of contempt for truth, for compassion, for holiness. It was pride, indifference to the needy, and celebrated perversity that provoked judgment. Lot shows us the contrast of someone who knew the truth, but had to live with the consequences of a choice based only on appearance. He was saved, but he lost much. His wife looked back, and that cost her life. His daughters carried with them marks of the culture they had absorbed. Salvation came, but not without pain. This story calls us to vigilance. It reminds us that we cannot ignore the warning signs God sends. His patience is real, but it is also limited. When a people rejects all invitations to change, judgment becomes necessary. And when the time of grace ends, only the harvest of choices made remains. For today, it is a call not to settle for environments or standards that lead us away from the truth. It is an invitation to intercession, as Abraham did, for those who still live surrounded by deception. And it is, above all, a reminder that living with God requires more than appearance. It demands real surrender, obedience, and faith. May we look forward, always. May we not long for what God has already left behind, and may our choices lead us close to life, never toward the path of loss. If this story touched your heart, write the word mercy in the comments. This will show that you understood the urgency of living a life aligned with the values of heaven. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel to receive more profound biblical stories like this one. Click the bell icon so you don't miss any episodes, and share this video with someone who needs to reflect on their choices today.